Food and Wine Insider is a weekly look at a $1.5 trillion industry touching every American. Devoted to the business of purveying food and decanting wines, Food and Wine Radio is a unique program highlighting not food recipes or wine vintages, but how to make a profit while satisfying America's palates. In this competitive but highly rewarding sector, many men and women have made profits while fulfilling a dream. Food and Wine Insider is all about better managing any business involving food and wine. Each week, your co-hosts sit down with successful restaurateurs, food mavens, winery vintners, store owners, food suppliers, and other leaders in the worldwide industry that centers on foodstuff and wine. In frank give-and-take sessions, guests and panelists talk about the business of bringing healthy and pleasurable foods and wines to others. Your Food and Wine Radio host are Ann Daw, former president of the Specialty Food Association and a longtime food executive who has held senior positions both here and abroad with Kraft Foods and Philip Morris. Don Mazzella, a nationally known business commentator. On each show, they invite leaders of the world's culinary and wine industries to share the secrets of their success. Visit us at foodandwineinsider.com.
And our next guest needs no introduction to you. She is Dianne Keeler Bruce. But for our audience, Dianne, and welcome to the program, tell us a little bit about yourself, and Ann will take it from there.
Good morning, Don. Good morning, Ann. Thanks so much for having me on. And I'll just tell a little bit about myself. I am the owner of a brokerage company, DKB Sales and Marketing, headquartered out of New York City. And we primarily focus on manufacturers and importers of natural, organic, and specialty brands. And I started the company in 1990 because I saw a void in the marketplace for brokerage companies representing these types of products. And back then, in the 90s, natural and organic really wasn't prevalent. It wasn't expansive. It wasn't in the supermarkets at that time for the most part. It was just starting to trickle in. And I just saw that that was where the future was going, and I thought I could provide a service in working with these importers and manufacturers, and I thought that was the perfect time to do it, and so I started it, and now 20-some years later, we're still going strong, and some of those same brands are still with me.
Dianne, that's fantastic. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show, and yes, it's a long time to have your business. I'm just curious for you to tell our listeners a little bit about what you were doing before you started your company.
Well, when I graduated from college, my first job out was working with Target stores, and I was in the management trainee program, and that was phenomenal learning experience working with a company as large as Target. But what happened was they were expanding, and then they decided to stop expanding, and so last hired, first fired. So I was let go amongst a bunch of other people and thought, okay, what do I want to do? And I knew I was in Minnesota at that time, and back, if you can imagine, in the 80s, there weren't a lot of different foods from around. There weren't. But I had traveled, studied abroad, both in high school and in college, so I had been exposed to a lot of different cultures. And I thought that brought me something, different to bring to the table to a company that I could work for. And there happened to be a wonderful, and still exists, liquor store with a great cheese and gourmet shop attached to it. And so I became the assistant manager there at Certix, and they were pioneers in they brought in their own cheeses using other people's, licenses and things like that, but they would tell the importers what to bring in. And so we were bringing in, containers of brie and having these amazing sales, and it was so much fun because it was one little store, but we moved out so much merchandise, and we got to experiment with amazing high-end products and educate the consumer. So it was really hands-on. And I did that and then became the manager when the manager left. And at that, about a couple years later, Dayton's which is a department store no longer around. It was part of the Target family, or Target was part of the Dayton family. And they wanted to expand their food halls similar to like on the Bloomingdale's level and Macy's level, like Macy's cellar. And they were trying to bring in, because Housewares was downstairs, they needed a draw, and they knew food would be a draw. So they wooed me away to open up their food hall. And again, that was amazing, opening something from the ground up, working with the architects, working with the design team, working with other departments, and building this place that would truly be a draw. And was able to work with them for a while, and I was happy there, but my husband and I both knew that at some point we wanted to go to either coast. And so happened that the chairman of Target moved to a supermarket chain out east, and the Grand Union Company, and he wanted to upscale the supermarkets. And so he came out, because he knew the people at Dayton's, he came out and toured my food hall and was impressed with it, and they contacted me. Lo and behold, I move out to the East Coast. I'm now in charge of specialty foods at the Grand Union Company, along with other categories. There was a consulting company at the time, McKinsey & Company, was consulting for them, and they coined the word category managers. So we were really the first category managers to look at categories within the store and analyze them in a different way than things have been done before. We were also the first supermarket to integrate specialty foods. So we did a lot of different things, and I can tell you, walking the food shows, a lot of people wanted to talk to me, but if they saw somebody else that might be not happy to see a supermarket carrying the line, they would say, "Dianne, come back later, when sex isn't here," or whatever.
Yeah. No, I think that's fantastic, because, I think there's a lot of, maybe just people just don't understand. You talk about being a brokerage company, but your company is sales and marketing. I think it would be great for people to understand, what does a broker really do, and how does that really help to build the brand properly?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think on that, the brokerage, just like with companies, every company has a different DNA, and I think brokerage companies are the same way. There's not you can't say that. The only thing I think that we all share in common is we represent companies. We're an extension of their sales department and or marketing department, and that's really, I think, the baseline. And from there, companies differ based on their expertise and their knowledge and so forth. And so I think the reason somebody would want a broker is, one, they know that a broker knows that area or those customers more intimately. They know what's happening, so they have a better pulse, finger on the pulse of what's happening, so they can feed back information to the importers or manufacturers versus a manufacturer having, let's say an East Coast, Midwest, and West Coast regional manager. How are they going to know every customer? But if they have a broker network and working with them, they're going to have a better feel of what's going on in their territory. And we work with them for that reason. We tell them, this is what this customer needs, this is what's going to make them happy. I view my job as making the buyer's job easier, so we take on a lot of their load, to help them out so that they're not having to do so much, and making sure you fill out paperwork. Right now, today, paperwork it's everything, and if you don't fill it out right, it can delay so much. And also training then the manufacturers or importers, it's like, give us good information, because that could also delay it if you don't give complete information. So there's so much that, just being prepared for presentations and also just working with a customer. And that's right. Something I find so many people aren't ready for that. They come in, they've got a great product and wonderful stories, but they're not ready.
Yeah.
And
I think go ahead. No, I was going to say, I think that's so right. And going to lead to a question I'm going to ask you in a bit, but, you know, you work with many companies. You know, you have some big companies like Hormel, you've got some smaller ones like Wanda's and Stash Tea.
I'm not with Wanda's or Stash Tea anymore. Those are old. So that you're looking at an old list. I should have gotten you a new one. Sorry about that. Smaller
That's
ones,
no problem.
Smaller
Go
ones
ahead.
like Belgravia Imports would be a smaller one. You're right. And some of the larger ones would be General Mills,
Right.
Hormel. I work with Cliff Bar. They're large now. When I started with them, they were smaller. So,
Yeah. No. But I think the question I have for you is, you know, there's big companies, there's smaller. How do you decide which companies to get involved?
I think that how I decide is first and foremost are there synergies and are we compatible? You know, are we on the same page? You know, it doesn't have to be similar sales styles, but just, you know, do they understand and are we comfortable with each other's work style? So that's first and foremost. And then secondly would be, do I believe in the line? Do I believe it has a future? Especially if I'm helping to pioneer something. You know, how ready are they to go to marketplace? You know, do they have correct information? Do they have adequate inventory? Are they planning for growth? That type of thing. So it has a lot first to do with people. I think that's the first thing, and then secondly the product, and then lastly just the organizational standpoint. So, you know.
Excellent. Yeah, and just building on that, because you brought this up almost in what you were saying before. What advice would you give to those budding entrepreneurs who think, hey, I've got this great idea and they want to turn it into a commercial product, and sometimes what I've heard is, okay, now I need a broker and a distributor, but they have no clue what either of those things mean because they aren't as knowledgeable on the whole supply chain side. What advice would you give them?
Well, especially for somebody starting out, that person, the owner, the creator is the most passionate person. So they're going to always be the best salesperson. Even if they think they can't sell, they will be the best salesperson because it's their product. So I would say starting out, it's really important to be involved. And I think a broker, depending on, because there's different levels of brokers too. There's brokers that call on individual stores. There's brokers that call on distributors. There's brokers that call on, you know, so there's different classes of trade. My brokerage company, we call on distributors in large chains and some smaller chains. So we're dealing with products that are ready to go to more supermarket level, whereas somebody else might be totally just, I want to sell direct to that retailer. And it's perfectly fine either way. They need to know which route they want to go to, because if they think they can do both, they won't do as well, because what will happen is, let's say they sell directly to one retailer and then they go to a distributor, and the distributor, that's one of their accounts, and that manufacturer, if they sold them at a price that doesn't allow it to move over to that distributor, you're going to automatically just slow yourself down or sabotage yourself. So I think they need to know who they are selling to and what their goals are. Do they want to, you know, I'll take, for example, Republic of Tea or Stonewall Kitchen. Stonewall now is selling through distributors, but for years and years, they didn't. They sold directly to the retailer, and that was their philosophy. And
right.
And then you've got other accounts that, you know, primarily sell through distributors. So, but the guys who really try to do both in the beginning, it's a recipe for disaster.
Right. I mean, I think a big part of it is, you know, knowing your consumer and what's the best channel to reach that consumer.
Correct.
Sometimes it may be a supermarket, maybe it's food service, maybe it's, you know, some other different channel. And then trying to get that expertise in that right channel is where you come in, because you have the relationships, you know, the buyers, you know how to move the product forward. I'm going to go back now in time a little bit, because what I thought was really fascinating about your background was that you predicted food shopping and eating trends in 1998. And some of them were the growing consumption of organic foods, heightened interest in natural foods, experimentation with Asian cuisines and flavors, Korean, Thai, Vietnamese, more Eastern influenced products, more teas, super vegetables, juicing and juicers. I could go on and on. They've all come to fruition. And so I guess you're a prophet on top of being a phenomenal broker. What do you think are some of the trends that are happening now?
Oof. I think some of it is, I think we're going to see packaging changes because of the waste factor. I think manufacturers are going to start looking at that more closely, like, because especially with e-commerce, when you order something online, it comes in a box, and so how is it? I think manufacturers are going to need and are looking at how should it be packaged to not only work on a shelf but also to be shipped in a box. And they might end up with two different kinds of product, packaging. They might have to, because to be more ecological and also to just work better in the channels of distribution. So I think that's going to be a big trend, just packaging. And if you look at it, go to Europe, I mean, the way their product is packaged when it shows up on the shelf, there's so much less waste there. So I think that's something is going to be looked at. And so there's one area. I think organic and natural are just going to continue to grow. I think they're kind of intermixing now. People are continuing to look for ways of eating better. In the old days, they might have taken a pill to feel better. Now they want to eat to feel better. And, so they want to make sure they're eating properly. I think also diet-wise, I really think that in the future we're going to see people having their customized diets. So, and you might be, intolerant of let's say almonds, so your nutritionist is going to, work a diet up for you, and you're going to have this customized diet. And I think that's going to become more and more prevalent, but obviously for people of means, but I think that's something I think you're going to see more customization.
Yeah. No, I think those are really terrific. Anything else?
I think I'm just trying to think about flavors that I'm seeing now. I don't know. Again, the portable food product. I mean, that's not going to end because so many people just are eating on the go. And one thing I think was interesting. There was an article in the Harvard Business Review. I think that's where it was, where 45% of the population doesn't like to cook. 45% is ambivalent, and only 10% loves to cook. And that is amazing. So, especially in our industry, that means we're pretty much selling to the 10%. You know? And only a percentage of that 10%, because not everybody's buying specialty foods.
Right.
So that's something that's really interesting. So our little piece of the pie is quite small, but it also is moving the needle and making big companies. I mean, all the small companies are making the big companies wake up and, listen. I mean, Tropicana just came out with a probiotic juice. How long has those been out? And now they're doing it. So, but the bigger companies, if they aren't doing the research and development, then they're buying smaller companies because they can get to market a lot faster. Like General Mills buying Larabar or Muir Glen. I mean, I started working with Muir Glen way back in the beginning, and then they were bought by Cascadian Farms, so I started to work with Cascadian Farms, and then General Mills bought them, so I've been working with General Mills since they purchased the brands, and that's, they're keeping it true to the course and true to, the mission statement. So I think it's a really good point that you're making, is that the entrepreneurs really have changed the way the consumer is eating, because essentially they ultimately influence the larger companies that have to take, if these trends take a hold, they don't want to lose the business. And yet by the same token, they're letting the entrepreneur do kind of all the research and all the development, and it's almost easier to buy the company. But, I'd love for you to continue to talk about, what makes those relationships successful, because sometimes a big company buying a really small company, the small company gets lost
in the shuffle, and its mission, its DNA kind of gets lost, and the product changes over time. In some of the ones that you've experienced, it sounds like there's been some success. What's kind of been the elements of that?
Well, I think they've kept the people on. I think that's one thing. They've let them run autonomously for a while, and before they integrate them into their structure, I think that's really important. They also, from a customer standpoint, allowing the customer to, they're not just walking away from the smaller guys, and I think that's important too. So they're trying to keep it pretty much status quo, but giving them the muscle behind and, just more ability to penetrate more markets and get more household penetration. So I think that's when larger companies are looking at smaller companies to buy, I think that is really important that they don't mess them up, and they do let them stay, and help guide them in their expertise, So, I mean, they've got great, research facilities. They've got great, QC departments, that type of thing. So they can bring up. So I think bringing the two strengths from both sides, it's a great way for success.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to just see more and more of that. And I think a lot of small companies, that's their goal when they start out now.
Yeah.
Is to be bought.
You're Dianne, you're in a field that historically or typically has been dominated by men. What has been any difficulties in being a woman in sales? Any stories you'd like to share on meeting with buyers? I'd love to hear about that.
I'm fortunate that I have 3 brothers, no sisters. So I think that really helped. I wasn't given any slack growing up. I mean, I don't think I heard. They called me names more often than not. So I was used to being, picked on. But going out, I was really lucky starting at my brokerage business. I had some wonderful buyers that really believed in me and believed in my products. And they opened the door, and I was able to use their stores as success stories and then take it from there and expand, distribution. But I think and those were all guys. They really, somehow they took me under their wing and just really, they believed in me, and they saw, I worked really hard, and they knew that. And I was persistent. I remember one time, this was before I was a broker, I wanted to sell to a distributor down in Florida, and he didn't want to see me. But I was down there seeing another distributor, so I thought, I'm going to go and just show up. And it wasn't in one of the better neighborhoods. And so I called him from a gas station, and the gas station had bulletproof glass at the cashier's desk. So you can imagine the neighborhood I was in. So I called him and told him where I was. And he goes, "You get over here right now. You shouldn't be outside." And so I got to see him. So it's a matter of just, persistence and tenacity and following through. And I think that's why, and I didn't view myself as, I didn't think it was, women against men or anything like that. So, I mean, there's definitely were experiences, but I mean, I think we've all had those, but, we're hearing a lot about it in the news today, and it's prevalent everywhere. So I think it's something that we're learning from it now, and I think every industry will change from the news that's happening today. And I was fortunate enough I was never in a position where anything that happened to me was going to hurt me, so, professionally and or physically. So I was able to, deal with any of the issues that might have come up. I was able to just say, hey, and move on. So, but I think every woman has had that experience.
Yeah. But you had knowledge from the buyer side, from the retail side, because you worked at Grand Union, you worked with Target, so you kind of understood them, so that in positioning your products, you knew what they were looking for. So I think that was really a helpful sort of background to have versus going in cold and not necessarily having those relationships.
Oh, so I think that totally made the difference. Coming from the buying side and merchandising side. I think that completely made the difference because I understood what they were looking for. I understood when their bosses were yelling at them and what they were demanding. I understood margins. Some accounts were margin driven, some were bottom line driven. So, if you understand that, then you know how to sell to them. And I knew that because having lived in those environments and knowing what my bosses were demanding of us, you learn how to then work with each account. And that definitely helped me. If I didn't have that background, it would have been so much harder.
Yeah. So what's next for you? What do you see coming for DKB sales and marketing?
I think building on the brands that we have and getting them, more distribution, and that's, to me, there's always room for growth. So I never feel a brand is reached its peak, and I think there's always places to look and for new opportunities. It's the evolution. I mean, retailing's changing, so you have to look at every area. And I'm primarily focused on retailing, so I'm not talking about food service or other types of channels. So, but retailing is definitely changing, and I think we all are looking at that, in which direction, and how do we communicate to the consumer. So there's going to be a lot more, I think, changes in marketing materials and so forth because of the changes and the needs of our customers.
And I've been told I get to ask you one other question. The broker community, tell me about that. Do you have the opportunity to talk with other brokers? Do you all share ideas? How is that field? Is it competitive, or is it more of a camaraderie?
I think it's competitive to some extent, but I mean, I've got some really good relationships with quite a few of the brokerage companies, and so we do, especially now with, for example, UNFI buying Haddon House. I used to call them Haddon House, and so now they're part of UNFI. I'm still calling on those retailers, but I'm not the broker of record calling on UNFI. So I do work with the brokers that call on UNFI, and fortunately we get along. So there's nobody trying to throw anybody under the bus here. And that really helps a lot. And it's just a matter of, and I'm part of the Broker Advisory Council on the Specialty Food Association, so I get to work with other brokers that way. So directionally, we're helping the industry and trying to communicate more to our fellow brokers and bring them and get them more involved, and also trying to educate, like you brought up earlier in the conversation, what does a broker do, and when does a manufacturer and importer need one? I mean, that to me that question is always asked, and that's the first question and the most important question. So that's what we're always trying to do, is helping people that way to understand that.
Don, I'm going to turn it to you, but Dianne, I want to thank you so much for being on the show and providing your perspective. It's great to hear about sort of the whole broker business and how you've brought something really different to the party, and the fact that you really do stay ahead of trends so that you can help the manufacturer really be successful, whatever channel they're trying to sell their products into.
Well, Dianne, if people want to reach you, how do they do that?
Well, I have a website. It's dkbsales.com. That's there also, and on there's phone numbers and emails as well. So that would probably be the best way. I'm also in the directory of the Specialty Food Association, so I'm on in that as well, so it could be reached that way.
Spell out your website.
dkbsales.com.
Okay. Well, Dianne, thank you so much for being with us. A link to your website will be on foodandwineinsider.com tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome, and you two, both of you, have a great weekend. Thanks again.
Want to know more about health savings accounts for your company or yourself? Go to 2hsa.com and get a free employer's primer. Health savings accounts are a cost-effective way of offering health care benefits to your employees and yourself. HSAs build retirement funds for your employees,
improve morale, and reduce your health care benefit cost. For a free employer guide to HSAs, go to 2hsa.com. That's 2hsa.com.
Dan Perkins here from Recalculating.biz with your featured book. I want to tell you about a recent interview I had with Bob Bethel, a turnaround specialist with lots of success in small business. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. He tells us of his life successes and failures that have made him and his clients so successful. Over the years, Bob has brought 77 companies back from the brink and changed them into thriving, profitable businesses. His energy is amazing, and at 74, he proves that you can still have a great deal to give others if you just try. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. One insight struck me was that most companies do not have a plan. The old Chinese proverb says, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there, is true today. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. This has been Dan Perkins with your Recalculating.biz featured book.
You can listen to past shows at foodandwineinsider.com.
Josh Ruiz is a partner and co-founder of Twisted Roots, a very unusual winery. We invite him here to tell us about his winery business, his plans for the future, and why he added a group of friends and relations to grow his business. Josh, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, Josh, there's a lot to your winery and to your story. So here is Ann to start off the questioning.
All right.
Hi, Josh. Welcome to Food and Wine Insider. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. I did a lot of reading about your background, and I would love for you to talk to the audience about the background on Twisted Roots. It's a vineyard that's nearly 100 years old. I guess this year it'll be 100 years old, but only producing its own wine since 2005. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you again for having me. So Twisted Roots was first started by my wife's family in 1918 in the Lodi area of California. They're Germans. They came over here at the turn of the century, and long story short, they tried their hand at different things of agriculture. And in 1918, they planted grapes because basically their neighbors were planting grapes. At that time, wine, we all know, wasn't what it is today. And by luck, by intervention, whatever you want to call it, they've held on to that same vineyard since 1918. And of course, this year we're celebrating 100 years. But the really interesting part for me, I came into the family, married in, obviously, and I recognized the fact that they had this amazing vineyard and this amazing story to tell. But from 1918 until 2005, they never made wine. And even in 2005, it was really Julie's uncle, Julie is my wife, sorry. It was my wife's uncle who was just kind of fooling around with making some wine. So even in 2005, it really wasn't commercial production until 2010. And so plus years go by of this amazing vineyard producing these amazing grapes for all these wineries around California and really the country. And I was blown away that they weren't doing something of their own and weren't sharing that story. And so I asked her uncle if I could buy some grapes and participate and try to make wine. And I had no formal education in the winemaking at all, but I loved drinking wine. And I thought, well, here's my chance to teach myself how to make wine. And if nothing else, we'll have a good time. And that's kind of how Twisted Roots today, the winery and the brand got started. But as we talked about it, the roots run really, really deep with the vineyard and the family being there 3 generations, now going on 4 generations.
Fantastic. You've achieved Lodi appellation. Could you explain why it's important to recognize certain regions for their fine wines?
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize different regions because ultimately grapes, just like any other thing, certain varieties and certain clones thrive in different weather and different climates. And, much like Monterey County has Pinot Noir and Chardonnay because of their climate and their soil, Lodi is really, really important to the wine world because of the heat that it has in the soil and the little microclimates. So we get the bigger reds we get the Petite Syrahs and the Zinfandels, but also we have the history there. There's not a lot of old vines around, but the vast majority of them are within the Lodi region. So you have history along with perfect climate for certain varietals. And that's what we kind of focus on, is those varietals that work well in the Lodi region.
Twisted Roots was also one of the first growers certified under the Lodi rules for green and sustainable viticulture. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that certification includes? Because I think it's really fantastic that you have that designation.
Yeah, and we do too. We're really proud of it. Again, Julie's uncle, Ross, he was farming the vineyard for his entire life, and it was really important to him, and he's really the reason we're there. But he was one of the founding members of that organization in terms of one of the first vineyards to go into that certification. And ultimately, it's not organic. That's why it's certified green and sustainable, which is completely different, and I always like to make that distinction. But what we do as certified green and sustainable growers is we focus on utilizing the resources we have to the best of our abilities and trying to keep those resources around, not only for the next generation, but 2 and 3 and 4 generations down the road. It's about managing those resources. And I always point to our vineyard that's 100 years old. The vineyard's 100 years old. That we wouldn't have been able to do that if we were not stewards of the land and the water, and making sure that those land and water resources stuck around for the future. And again, sustainability is all about those resources and living within them and not depleting them. And a quick example I can give for the listener who might not be able to wrap their head around it. We have drip tape in the vineyard, which we irrigate our vineyards with, and we're up against a river, and the coyotes will come out at night because in the summertime it's very hot and they're looking for water, and they will chew on our drip tape, which is obviously a problem for us because now there's holes everywhere when we turn the drip tape on. But as sustainable farmers, instead of shooting the coyotes and getting rid of them because they're an important part of the ecosystem, what we do is we put a tub of water out, and every time we turn on the irrigation, we fill up the tub. And as long as they have water, they leave our irrigation alone. And in the meantime, they keep taking care of the small, rodents and things. So that's a very simple example of how to live within your resources and keep those resources around for the future.
No, that's fabulous, and I so appreciate you providing that example. You may not have been a vintner yourself, but you certainly have a passion for agriculture, because I want you to talk about your background, which is very steeped in agriculture.
Yes, it is. I'm very passionate about wine, but very close second to that is I'm very passionate about agriculture and sharing that with other people. And so I grew up in the Salinas Valley. I was born and raised in Salinas Valley, and my family had nothing to do with agriculture. I always tell people, agriculture started and stopped at the grocery store for us. But I was surrounded by it my whole life, and in high school I decided, I better educate myself as to what all this is, just learn what's going on around me. And I went out to the nearest farm. I asked the farmer, if he would teach me, and he put me in his truck for a week and drove me around and taught me, and I fell in love instantly. And I thought, this is a good, honest way to make a living, to feed the world. And I've never looked back since. And so I went off to school down at Cal Poly and came back. And even to this day, as much as I am into the wine and making the wine and all of that, I work every day in the fields of Salinas Valley growing vegetables, and I love it. I mean, there's nothing to me better than being out here in the farms with the people and the crops, and again, sharing that with other people around the world. So I love farming as a whole.
Yeah. You, if I'm not mistaken, you also work for Church Brothers as the VP of Ag Operations. Is that still the case?
Yes. Yeah, that is the case. That is my day job.
Yeah. I mean, I was sort of wondering, how do you manage a winery and an important role in growing a vegetable crop? Because that sounds like there's not enough hours in the day.
Yeah, sometimes, especially during crush, it gets a little tense, and there's a lot of late nights and early mornings. But I'm just one of those lucky guys that I'm very fortunate. that number one, my company knows I have a winery, and they let me they give me a little flexibility. But number two, and more importantly, I wake up every day and it's not work for me. So the long hours, I love them. I enjoy them, and it's easy for me when you're doing what you love, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So say again when you got involved with Twisted Roots, but more importantly, how did you change the direction of the company?
Yeah, so in 2005, like I mentioned, my wife's uncle Ross was making a little bit of wine, basically just for fun. And right after he made that, he came down with Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, better known as ALS.
Yes.
And obviously, life became more important, which it should. And so he had no interest in the wine and became more focused on family and life. And I was passionate about it, and that's when I asked him, you know, will you teach me? Will you let me learn from you? And so I can carry this legacy on for you and the family, but also for me as much. And so he did, a little bit begrudgingly, but Ross was the kind of guy who wanted, first and foremost, to help others and make others happy. So he kind of went against his own will a little bit and taught me, and we spent hours and hours on the phone together right up until he passed away. But he taught me a lot, and ultimately I was able to carry that torch and grow it. And, you know, Ross never intended for it to get as big as it is today. He was just having fun. But again, Ross saw in me the passion to do the wine, and so he went along for the ride to help me with my passion and my wants. And so in 2010, we officially got licensed and started producing wine on our own at that point. And that was myself, Ross, and then my wife's father was involved at that time as well,
Right.
Mike. And so the three of us.
Right. So originally there were these three partners, and I read the story about Ross, and it was very sad. I've had a friend that has passed from ALS, and it's pretty horrific. But in 2016, you and Julie bought the business. Tell us a little bit about the thinking behind that. That's a pretty big decision.
Yeah, it was a huge decision, and it didn't come lightly. Obviously, family is you know, part of our whole mantra. It's in our mission statement, and so but we also wanted to keep growing. We have a lot of people that have become friends now through the winery, and a lot of support and community support, and so we wanted to keep it growing and keep going and expand the business. And ultimately, Ross had passed on, and Julie's father, Mike, he really wasn't interested in doing that, so he allowed us to purchase the business and take that forward, and so we could go to the next level. And now we're just on the entry of that next level, which is, you know, we brought in some friends of ours as partners from college, and that was to help grow the business as well. The business is getting to a point now where I can no longer run it all by myself and continue my job at Church Brothers. And so the partners all have a role, and everybody is kind of specializing in their thing, and that's going to help us get to the next level, we believe, in terms of producing better wine and also more volume.
Yeah, I would love for you to talk about your three new partners, because they seem to bring very specific competencies to Twisted Roots. So can you talk a little bit about, I think there's Andy Gully and Matt Brem, and then there's Neil Amarante.
Yes, correct.
And I think you also have Whitney Pridey, I guess. But I would love for you to talk a little bit about what each of them brings to the party, because competencies in running any business is really critical. So you've done a really fantastic job of making sure you have the right, not just the right people, but also the right skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll start with Whitney. Whitney and her husband, Matt. Whitney's been kind of helping me out. She's got a history in the wine business in Paso Robles, managed some wine clubs and wine and tasting rooms and stuff down there. And she's a high school friend. And so I asked her if in the early stages, can you help me, meet with me and teach me some things? And she's been very good to us over the years. And so when it came time to bring on partners, it was a no-brainer to ask her to be a partner of the company. And now what she brings and what she manages is all of our wine clubs. So she's the wine club manager, and she does a fantastic job of arranging events and making sure that, our wine club members are happy and all of that kind of stuff. So that was a natural fit because she was already kind of helping a little bit on the behind the scenes. Neil Amarante, he's a college friend of all of ours. We're all college buddies at this point. But and what Neil is really, he's in the banking business. And so we brought him on to kind of make sure that we had somebody watching our financials and helping with future growth. I mean, ultimately, when you need to grow, you're going to need some financial help. And Neil, coming from the banking world, knows exactly how to manage that. So that was another piece of the pie that I knew I couldn't handle and wasn't my forte. So he fit that pie. Andy Gully is a really, really close friend of mine, again, from college. And what Andy brings to the table is interesting in a couple senses, that he's over in, the central part of California in a different region than we are. So that's a little more exposure, which is always great. But Andy is an agronomist. He's a field guy who knows how to manage crops and manage, fertilization and all of that stuff, much like myself. So having another agronomist on the team is great, because if I can't make it to the vineyard, Andy can. And so it just gives me a second set of hands in that sense. And so, again, there was a no-brainer to make sure that as we expand, we have another farmer, so to speak, that can help with that expansion. And then last but not least, we have Matt. And Matt is a college friend, and he is a salesman and a broker of vegetables in the Salinas Valley. And so he brings the aspect of sales and how to manage that piece of sales when it comes to our wholesale business, and how to manage trucks and deliveries and things like that. So these were all my friends. And so I lucked out in the sense that I had a group of friends that kind of fit, but every one of these segments were things that I couldn't handle anymore. And really my passion is focusing on the winemaking anyways. That's what I love, and that's what I want to do. So I get to be the winemaker and focus on that. And I have this great team of partners now who can go focus on the other pieces of the business.
And so talk a little bit about the types of wines you make. And Twisted Roots has some history in the vines themselves. So I would love for you to talk about that as well.
So we make 4 different varietals that we grow off of our family property. We do a Chardonnay, a Cabernet, and a Petit Syrah, and then, of course, our 1918 Old Vine Zinfandel. And I'll give you just a quick synopsis of each, in my opinion. Chardonnay in a warm climate like the Lodi region is very difficult, so we have to do a lot of canopy management and things like that to keep it from burning and scorching flavors. But ultimately, in the end, I try to make a product that is Chablis-like, and I think that it's unfortunate that Chablis kind of got a bad connotation there for a while, and I don't think people give Chablis today the credit that it really deserves. But the Chablis style to me is just nice, simple Chardonnay, not flashy, not big, not acidic, not all steel, not all oak and buttery, just a nice, simple little Chardonnay. And sometimes people criticize me, well, you shouldn't use the word simple. But when it comes to our Chardonnay, that's precisely what I want you to get. It's just a nice, simple drink. The Cabernet, very unique Cabernet in our vineyard. We have a clone of Cabernet that most people wouldn't touch. And the reason is because it's very, very light on tannins. It's light on color and tannins, and it almost drinks like a Pinot Noir in terms of body and tannins. All the fruit of a Cabernet without the big harshness of a Cabernet. And why we chose that is much like our entire story of Twisted Roots. We like being just a little different, and we like to stick out just a little bit. So we thought that was a good fit for us. Petit Syrah, I have to confess, even though our Zinfandel is famous and that's what's kind of made our name, the Petit Syrah is truly my passion. I think Petit Syrah is a highly, highly underrated grape and doesn't get anywhere near the credit it deserves. When done right, it's a big, bold, inky, dark wine, but it's not harsh. It's still drinkable, and you can just sit and enjoy a glass, which I do. And I think that really is, I try really hard to get people to understand that Petit Syrah isn't what they think it is sometimes. And then, of course, our Zinfandel, it's hard to argue with history. And when you've got these old vines, I always tell people in the tasting room, old doesn't mean it's good. Old just means it's different. And because they are old, their roots are really, really deep, and they can pick up different mineralities and different things in the soil that will change the wine. And so it's old vine Zinfandel is just a special thing. And I think we have one of those. We're fortunate to have one of those.
Awesome. So what's it, you're distributing to some stores today, your products. What's the challenge you're facing from a distribution standpoint, and how you get a retailer to say, hey, you really need to, stock my wine along with all the other wines that are coming from California and everywhere else?
Yeah, so we do have a little bit of wholesale right now, and the wholesale or the retail outlets, I guess I should say, that we do have, or the restaurants that we do have, they're places that I go to and frequent myself. So that's how I've been able to get in, is by being connected to the community, and that community where that store or restaurant's at, and being able to share my story with the proprietor of that restaurant or store, that chef. And I think that's biggest challenge is, originally, before I had the tasting room and things, I was only doing wholesale business. And the challenge for somebody my size is conveying that story, whether it's to the salesperson who will ultimately sell it to the store or the restaurant, or conveying it to the customer as they walk down the aisle of, thousands of bottles of wine. And
Right.
without the story, it gets very difficult. And I'm a big wine taster myself, so I love to go out to other wineries and taste wine. And the wine is great and important, but equally important to me is the story, the why, the who, the what, the where. And again, I think that's where tasting rooms have made the wine business what it is today, because you can go out and hear the stories.
Fantastic. So what's in store for this year and the future when it comes to Twisted Roots?
Yeah, so we're really excited. We have just recently acquired the building. So we were, the last 4 years, our tasting room was inside of an art gallery in Carmel Valley, which is about 15 miles outside of Carmel by the Sea for the listeners. And so this past fall we acquired that building, and now we are in the middle of a complete renovation. We're very, very excited. So sometime in early March, we're going to be opening up and relaunching our tasting room. And number one, we're going to have much more room now for events. We have a concert series during the summer where we bring in live music. And so this acquiring the building and the reconstruction will allow us to do that and have more folks come enjoy those events. And then ultimately, we're focused on continuing to make our wine and take on some more production. We really don't want to grow too fast, but we do want to grow a little bit. And then on top of our core 4 wines that we have, I've been starting to make hard apple cider and sparkling wine, and I'm starting to learn those processes now as well. So that's exciting because we'll be able to expand into those in the future. And we've got several things going on this year, and we're going to end the year with a big party to celebrate in the fall, which would be harvest time. We're going to celebrate the 100-year anniversary, of course, of the vineyard, and we're going to have a big 1920s black and white Hollywood party to celebrate. Lots of stuff going on.
That sounds fantastic. You also are very involved. You mentioned it just a bit in passing. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about, you're also involved with the community in the Carmel Valley community. Can you talk about the things that you're doing with the community, sort of your social mission in terms of the things that you do in the community itself? Because I think that's also really important.
Yeah, and we do too. We don't always project it out there, but I feel personally, and the entire team, Twisted Roots was started with the goal of, we're going to make great wine, but we're also going to make sure that we support the people around us who have supported us, and that is our community at large. And we focus every year on making sure that we are involved in community service, giving back to local nonprofits. At least a couple times a year we'll do benefit dinners where we provide the space and the wine and everything and donate to a nonprofit, because ultimately we're all in this together, no matter how you look at the world. And I generally at my core believe that we're all here to support one another, and you never, everybody needs something at some time in their life, and it can be whatever it is, but we need to support each other in that. And Twisted Roots has become my vehicle to do that. I didn't have the luxury prior to Twisted Roots. I didn't have the time maybe or whatever, but now I've got a facility. I've got a means of, wine is an easy thing to donate and to help support with other people. So we really focus on that and make it part of our marketing strategy every year to make sure that we're doing those things.
And so what do you do in your downtime, if there is any, you and Julie?
Julie, my wife and I, we're 37 years old, each of us. But the reason I'm saying that is because what we love to do in our downtime is honestly just to get on the couch and put on a fire and watch a movie. I mean, we are very blessed in what we do, and we don't take anything for granted. But when we do get those downtimes, we don't like to travel as much as, sometimes we're on the road anyway. So we really cherish those days at home when we can make dinner together, have a glass of wine together, and just relax. And so that's kind of been our little downtime lately, has been just a night at home making dinner or watching a movie.
Unfortunately, Dan, we've run out of time. We've been talking with Josh Ruiz. He's head of Twisted Roots, a winery. Your website again, Josh, and how people can reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us at twistedrootsvineyard.com on the internet. You can find us under that same tag for Instagram and Twitter. So I would love for everybody to go check it out and follow us on one of those.
Thank you so much. A link to your website will be on foodandwineinsider.com tonight. Thank you so much for being with us, Josh.
Thank you very much for having us. I really appreciate it.
And now it's time for Anne's comment on the trends in today's world.
Thanks, Don. I thought I would talk a little bit about the Amazon purchase of Whole Foods. I was reading a recent Harvard Business Review article, and the way they thought about the Amazon purchase was saying that they basically bought a network of 456 customer-friendly testing facilities, and that those testing facilities welcome 8 million volunteers each week. Clearly, Amazon has extraordinary experience in using pricing online. They use it either as a tool to communicate, to recruit, or to drive value. It's going to be interesting to me to see how Amazon translates that knowledge to the offline retail world, especially when it comes to pricing. Whole Foods struggled in the last couple of years from a perception of being overpriced. It was losing its customers that way, and it was aggressively promoting its 365 brand, which kind of left a little less room for other brands. But if you look at Amazon, they essentially sell brands online, and with those 456 stores to use as experimentation, it's clear that Amazon will test varying pricing models to recruit new customers and drive value. So what does this mean for brands? Traditional supermarkets are going to find themselves undermined either by the German discounters Aldi and Lidl, who carry very, very few SKUs. They'll also be challenged by Walmart on value and specialty stores who are all about differentiation to provide unique items not available in other channels and to treat their customers as guests. To me, the key will be differentiation. What are the new brands to the market that's really differentiated and desired by the consumer, but still taps into big behavior? Online, Amazon is selling products with brand names, which gives small brands a chance to have an even playing field with large CPG companies who can afford to own the shelf at retail. Maybe indeed how we think of the shelf will now change and provide for more opportunities for small brands to thrive. Consumers still, they want to know where their products come from. They expect a clean ingredient line, and they want to know that there's a real person behind the product. Hopefully Amazon will learn this as well.
You've been listening to Food and Wine Insider with Ann Daw and Don Mazzella. Want to join us on a future show? Contact us at foodandwineinsider.com. Until next time, have a passion for food, wine, and profits, and think of our program, Food and Wine Insider.